was looking for this really good review that was done on the Jesus Revolution movie, and now it's just been smothered. I can't find it. It was by a young guy who really, had sort of a hyper delivery, but his content, his observations were really astute and funny and really right on point. And I've just spent really the last hour trying to find in any way, shape, or form, by all means of search on YouTube, trying to find this review that he actually did of a pre release. It wasn't a version of the film, it was a long trailer. And then he promised to do, once the movie came out, he promised to do a review of the full movie. So I'm hoping that he'll do that. But gosh, I wish I had saved it to my favorites, because every well, I can't say every lunatic and their mother is out there doing reviews, but there's a couple out there that are reasonable and sensible, but the yahoos, um, and I am thinking Jonathan Swift, they are coming out of the woodwork and starting to go to town and doing their so-called research, and really doing their best to ruin something that, um, and this is so typical, was really a beautiful thing at the time. I know something of this personally because I experienced it in 1975 as kind of sort of the second wave of the Jesus movement. The first wave is maybe maybe starts in the summer of 69 and through 70 and 71, and maybe that's when the revolution happens, down at Calvary Chapel in Costa Mesa, and where Chuck Smith, who I ended up getting to know a little bit because I was eventually ordained in 1984 at a ministry, Warehouse Ministries, that was an offshoot and under the hierarchy, as it were, of Calvary Chapels. We were sort of oh, I don't want to use the word renegade, but we were a little more. We were the experimental, what if version of what a Calvary Chapel might someday want to be. So they kept they kept us thoroughly branded as Warehouse Ministries, and I didn't even know we were a Calvary Chapel until, you know, one day Chuck Smith came through town, and I was introduced by our senior pastor to him and spent a little time with him. He was a delightful, absolutely delightful man. I'd heard him on the radio a lot and listened to his teaching. He was just a wonderful, gregarious, warm-hearted, sweet, deeply, richly loving man. Um, and I think Kelsey Grammer did a great job in capturing um, some of Chuck Smith's passion and some of his humility. But I think it would be hard to capture the warmth that exuded from the man, the genuine humor and warmth that it just exuded from him. Um, so I I come along in the second wave in 1975 um, as a radical convert because actually I um, come across really put Christianity to the test. Uh, find that on a factual historical base it holds up strong and tight, but the sort of Christendom around me, the sort of religious folk around me are sort of the hypocrisy level is extremely high, and I at a Christian camp in Estes Park, Colorado, I say enough of this nonsense. I'm out of here, and I reject uh, the Christian religion, and then 10 minutes later have a radical, very personal and undeniable encounter with um, Jesus, um, who essentially says, well, okay, if you don't want that, do you want me? And I say, well, you I want, but I really don't want this other stuff. And it's like, okay, but do you want me? Yes, I want you. And so begins oh my goodness, we're coming up on almost 5 decades of very, very, certainly unexpected at every turn relationship. But it all began back from the Jesus movement, and and probably, in all fairness, I am in some way the whole setup for that came out of that original Jesus movement that begins with Lonnie Frisbee and Chuck Smith in Southern California, and then also and they don't really bring this up in the film, but there's a lot happening in Northern California as well. Um, Up in San Francisco, there is a revolution taking place in San Francisco that I will almost immediately plug into in 1975 through 1980 before I leave for Sacramento and then become involved immediately with Warehouse Christian Ministries. But there is the Berkeley Christian Coalition that where Spiritual Counterfeits Project and Radix Magazine, and they have a great campus newspaper, Right On, and that's happening. And Earl Palmer's holding court at Berkeley First Pres, and he's fantastic. And there's some other really great churches, and the Jesus movement is big and bold and alive in particularly Berkeley, but also in San Francisco as well. So as I watch the film, and I'll close with this, as I watch the film, first of all, I generally don't like Christian movies. I, I assume that they're going to be far too cautious and careful and be afraid to offend. And the gospel itself, if you read the four gospels in the book of Acts and then you read Paul, that's just not how it reads. You know, there's real language there. There's real blood and guts there. There's incredible foolishness and humiliation and embarrassment. And the disciples are oftentimes idiots. And there's all sorts of real life human stuff there. And in my experience, since 1975, most Christians are just wildly uncomfortable with that. They're just, they want everything on the front. They want the facade to appear, you know, like like every church is, a Holiday Inn, when it's really more, in reality, it's more of an emergency room, because people are hurting and broken and in need, and they have real questions. And we're all like that, all the time. And it's better to be honest. And one of the great things about the Jesus movement was, and I remember this so vividly back in the early 70s, is that it's true. The establishment and running after money and running after power and, and the military industrial complex, all of those things had had shown themselves to be empty and corrupt and of no value and meaningless. Or as the author of Ecclesiastes says, just chasing after smoke, chasing after wind. And we had a sense of that. And so, and somehow we had a sense that asking the deeper questions was okay. Like, what is truth? And we were open to that and pursuing it, come what may. I mean, when I pursued, the Christian faith and finding out about that, it wasn't as if I wasn't ready, if that didn't work out, to pursue Buddhism and a variety of other paths. I mean, I was ready to, to explore anything and everything that might have truth to it. And I was wide open, and I wanted to know what was true. And that was the prevailing sentiment. And somehow this movie has captured, both in its cinematography and in its feel and in its writing, it's managed to capture that feeling that we had during those years, which was, there was an openness, there was a lack of judgment, there was a spirit of exploration. Sometimes that got some of us in trouble. Others of us didn't get us in much trouble at all, but we still kept pursuing. And the idols of the culture were debunked. Nobody was buying into, nobody was, nobody was quietly quitting. We just quit altogether. We just said, forget it. I'm out. Or I'll just go slam my 20 hours, enough to put gas in my car and, and whatever. And then, but I'm not putting any stock in, in any of this nonsense. I want to find out what's true and what's real. And for some of us, we felt like we found that real connection. And that has sustained us for decades. I can't speak for anyone else. But one of the things that surprised me about this film was that I felt that it captured, so surprisingly so, it captured the feeling of those years, both in its cinematography and in the music and in the feel and then in the writing, the questions and the interactions. It really, it's really authentic. It really got it. And other people are going to come in, from the outside, and they're going to say, oh, blah, 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 this, and blah, blah, blah. And, and they're going to try and tear it apart, from a million different angles. That's their choice. And they get their own reward. But as someone who actually went through it and was actually there and actually experienced it, this is actually a fine film, and pretty accurate. And I regret that Christendom, the American church today, is not the open, loving, wash your feet at the door, humble. Um, we welcome your questions, and we'll never judge you. And you are loved, and we're open. Kind of Christianity that was availed to me in so many places in the early 70s and mid 70s, and which we kept trying to dish out up even through the early 80s, until things tragically changed, towards the mid 80s and then going into the 90s, when the church decided almost across the board in America that they needed to become influencers. Wow, what a terrible, awful mistake. No, no. Power politics, influencers. Um, that's where the big mistake was made, and we're still reaping the whirlwind for that today. So here's my review. No fancy graphics or cuts from the film, unfortunately, and just me and my ridiculous hat. But there you go.